Hello, everybody. Hi. Welcome to Stories and Prayer. I'd like to start with a prayer. Let me see. Let me make sure I have all of the right microphones on. You can hear me, correct? Let's see. Let me get the chat. Put the chat up. Let's see it. Come on. Screen delayed on that. Okay. I won't worry about that for a second. There it goes. Okay. You see me. You got the audio on the screen capture. Let's go ahead and restart the screen capture. Okay. You can see me there and you can see me there. And if I switch screens and I go to, I don't want to start that.
Watch what happens.
Let me go ahead and play the, wait, what happened? No, I didn't want to try Spartan. Let's go to this.
When a 50-year-old man walks DHT
Tired of losing hair? You're not alone.
naturally for just 90 days.
Block
Day one,
DHT.
nothing
Is
visible.
DHT what makes your hair
Tech
fall out?
is getting wild, and not just like AI robots. I'm talking about stuff that can literally.
You guys able to see the blue moon from where you guys are? We couldn't see it here in Kansas.
Well, let's start with a prayer first. And let's say, Heavenly Father, please forgive me. Heavenly Father, we come to thee and before this streaming, talking about stories and prayer, we're going to cover the alien stories of some South Americans and things that go on in South America that are the UFO type nature and the origins and the peoples in them or under them, human or otherwise. And we wonder why those are, Father, in our world. If we have help from thee and good angels, then why do we have these beings that look like ants to some? And so we're going to study a little more about it. And please bless those who are all watching. Whatever they are intensely worthy of asking thee for, please grant everyone their desires to improve, get ahead, survive, and learn. Amen. So, tonight I wanted to start about talking. I already said about the aliens that are in South America, the ones that have been seen. What interested me on this topic is I was thinking of when I was in Chile in 2016, about 9 years ago. I went down to Chile and I stayed there about 6 months busking in Bella Vista, in Santiago. There's a district near Condes, and it's Las Condes, and it was an area where there's the obelisk and the train station, Baquedano train station. It's one of the main downtown stops. It's not near the government buildings, but it's past the church down O'Higgins Avenue. It's where the what's that called? The lock bridge, where the people chain their locks. They write their names on a lock and then they key it onto the bridge. The key bridge, is that what it's called? I can't remember the street, but if you cross that, where usually they'll put you in a hotel on the other side of the river. Like if you know where look up where the GAM Theater is, GAM on O'Higgins, and across the street is the Holiday Inn Crown Plaza Hotel. So it's a 5-star hotel right there on O'Higgins. It's not a real fancy spread hotel. It's pretty narrow on the block with the property they bought. Um, but I think it has a tennis court on top. I was in it on business back in the 90s. It's funny. I was walking past it with my rechargeable 50-watt karaoke amp on a dolly that I bought at the local Home Depot down there. It's called Sodimac. Their Home Depot. It's exactly the same as a Home Depot store. They run it the same. The aisles are all numbered, and they have lumber on one side and forklifts going around and employees dressed in uniforms, just like we do it in the States. Chile is would be my favorite country to live in if I left the United States or decided to, or if I had to. Just find another country to get comfortable living in, maybe have a dual residence, would be Chile. Out of all the countries in South America, I think South America is the new land of promise, out of all the countries in the world with the resources, a lot of them are just big islands, prone to flooding and hurricanes and storms. And then the others are thick, dense jungle and mountainous terrain and wet and muddy villages. And then you have countries where you have deserts and hard clay and land that's not productive, but you have oil. You have to build things, a lot of artificial living spaces and things like that. That's tough. And you look at Europe. Europe is old. It's civilizations, cultures, the architecture, the way things work, the plumbing. I've stayed in hotels all over Europe. I've traveled to about 60 countries in my job. I got my master's in international management, and I have a degree in economics, and I have a 2-year degree in anatomy and physiology. So I started from the beginning. I knew in high school, even early in high school, like ninth grade, that I wanted to work for a pharmaceutical company overseas in their international subsidiaries, and eventually run an international subsidiary company of a United States or a European company, and run a subsidiary. That's what Steve-O's dad did when Steve-O was growing up, and that's what I did. I did the same thing. I did run the St. Jude medical subsidiary in Brazil. Only one operation, which was a neurostimulator division. They already had their own office and operations set up. They have other operations with pacemakers and a whole team. When I say operations, that usually it's in accounting. It can be like file 803 is all of the neuromodulators that go into the what country was I in? I just forgot what country I was in. But anyway, I just completely forgot the registration. The things I used to do there in subsidiaries was I ran one for a biologics company that became Novavax. If you know the vaccine company Novavax now. I was manager of Europe. There wasn't anything going on. We didn't have any sales, but we had contacts and researchers and meetings to discuss setting up a lab. I was asked by that company to set up a lab in Brazil. And I was only 28 years old, 28, 29. Right as I was turning, from 28 going to 30, I was traveling around Europe and Latin America, setting up distributors, some agents, and then wholly owned subsidiaries. Once when you get in there, like when you get in with a company like St. Jude Medical, my little company was bought. We did, I can't remember how many $1 million a year. We were like a $600 million company a year, and we got bought by a company that does over $3 billion a year and sales in 170 countries. It was called St. Jude Medical. Now it was bought by Abbott Laboratories. But I was in it when it was the smaller company, this advanced neuromodulation systems. And so in advanced neuromodulation systems, I went on there in the early 2000s. In the noughties, I went there and set up all of their Latin American operations. They didn't have anything, but they had a woman that was selling implantable class 3 neurostimulators in Colombia, living in Pembroke. That's a neighborhood in the Miami, North Miami. But I really don't like the Miami model. You know, by the time I worked in the 90s selling vaccines. In 91, I was hired to work in this company called Immunogenetics, IGI. And that was my first company. They're the ones that hired me straight from campus at Thunderbird. Went to work at Immunogenetics as their senior sales manager over Latin America and the Caribbean. And I was 27, I think. Yeah. I turned 27. I was 26 when I was hired and turned 27. So here I am in my mid-20s managing all of Latin American sales and operations for a public company that was on the American Stock Exchange that sold vaccines for chickens and pharmaceuticals for dogs and pets for veterinary clinics. And we had a human division that was doing development of human vaccines and also gain of function with viruses in the lab and doing some feasibility research, not anything serious. Study. H1N1 was a disease that we were looking at to see how it worked. We thought it was going to break out in the next decade because it broke out in the noughties of the 1900s, like 1903 or 1904. The Spanish flu broke out. That was H1N1. So I remember I was in that lab, and then like 12 years later, 14 years later, H1N1 came out. And I thought back to that, working at that lab and some meetings I was in. And I thought, oh, wow, it did. But it makes you wonder in a conspiratorial way that if you're working on something and you're studying it or, seeing how it works, what debilitates it, what makes it be stronger, just to observe, no plans. It could escape, or you could let it get out without knowing it, or you could, someone in the group could be corrupt and take it and do something with it, let it launch into the public. But the cover story would be that it came from a bat in a wet market. If allegedly you could do that with, I was going to run one of those labs in Brazil, but my wife refused to go to Brazil. She did not want to live in South America. She said she would not be able to see her mother. And we lived in New Jersey, and I said, nothing's going to be different. You'll be able to fly home whenever you want. I'll be president of the Brazilian company. We'll have our children in American schools. We'll have maids. We'll have security people and drivers and live like kings down there. Why won't you go? She just refused. That was a big treason in my marriage, because even when I dated her, when I told her what I wanted to do, my aspirations for life, I said I would love to live overseas with my family and raise my kids in a foreign country for 5 or 6 years, 6 years tops, just give them a good taste of what it's like to live in another country, and then come home and Just, you have bilingual kids, the kids that are responsible and they know the cultural differences and what culture is, different family values. I just thought it would be great. I saw people when I was a missionary. I was a Mormon missionary. I don't go there anymore, but I had a mission president, and there were mission presidents in the wards I was in Houston, and people I knew that went overseas. I met Charlene Wells, Miss USA. I met her at a chapel in Tucumán, Argentina. Was it Tucumán? It was either Salta or Tucumán, Argentina. I went all over. I went to Mendoza, Godoy Cruz, near La Rioja. I went to what's the hot, dry one? Santiago del Estero. I was in La Banda, which is a satellite outside of Santiago de la Banda. Santiago del Estero. It was very, very hot. I remember the hottest day was like 140, 150 centigrade. It was like 100 and Fahrenheit was like 120 something. And we just shacked it. There was no air conditioning. We just got in we lived on the roof of this lady's house in like a maid's quarters. And we had 2 beds, and we just shut the windows and laid in bed with some towels and got them wet and just endured it. But we were used to it because when you're in Argentina and you're walking around, when it's summertime, I mean, it gets cold there too, like we have seasons. They're just the opposite of us, 6 months forward or backwards. If you want to know what the season is in Chile or Argentina, just think 6 months ahead. So they're like in June or June or July. And then if you want to, or backwards, and you'll be at June or July. Just think 6 months forward or backwards, and that's the season, because the sun does the same opposite thing on the other side of the earth, and then it comes back. But when it goes all the way down there, as it makes its journey down, it stops at the Tropic of Capricorn. And on 3 days, it bounces on the same. If we had the bouncing ball, we could go, and the sun goes bouncing down to Capricorn, bonk, 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 and have it bounce 3 times and then turn into a bird and fly away and then start heading back up. And the sun goes back to Cancer. Cancer is the farthest north that it goes. In our July or June, when is summer solstice? Solstice, that means where the soul stands. So what's the highest point? I'm off the topic of the show, but I'm getting into my career that goes off on other tangent subjects. But let me go back to the job. I was in charge of all of Latin America and the Caribbean. So I would travel, of course, to all those countries. My first trip was for 2 weeks, and my wife hated that in the beginning. I had to travel solid 2 weeks. The president said, if you go out of the country, we want you to stay 2 weeks. Don't just fly overseas for a 2-day meeting. So I went to Argentina, Chile, Honduras, and the Dominican Republic in one trip. And then I went back and I went to Nicaragua and Costa Rica, back to Honduras. And I was in the 90s traveling all over those countries, in Nicaragua, Honduras, and Costa Rica. I saw Nicaragua right after the Sandinistas had wiped it out. A few years after that, I met Duilio Baltodano. He was a big politician. He was vice president for a while of the country, and he owned a ranch, and his family owned the Ford tractor dealership. And he had a big cattle farm with these high-grade beef cattle. And the Sandinistas took over his dealership and used it as a headquarters. And then they ate all of his cattle to feed the army that they made. And they used to shoot people. They would catch them because at nighttime they'd be crawling around like this, doing the military crawl. And they would check people's elbows at work to see if they were rebels. That's how they knew who they were. Whoa. That's what Duilio told me. I went to his ranch and we had a party. There were about 8 of us. The other guys were from Colombia. They were from all over Colombia. My Colombian distributor had 3 offices. Well, he had more. The ones I went to were in Bogota, Cali, and Medellin. But I would go to all 3 of those offices all the time, especially with the chicken vaccines. It was fun because I would go to a main city and then bounce around in a truck and go with these veterinarians and other chicken farm experts. And then there's also the hatching. They have the chicken hatcheries. And you have to have the chickens hatched and then vaccinated before they go to the farm. And then on the farm, you have a vaccination program. So I was going in hatcheries and I was going on farms. And I went to just about every chicken farm in all of Latin America. I went all over Argentina. I went all over Brazil, especially Brazil. I must have gone to 12 different states in Brazil. And a lot of it driving. Because you drive. We work for Sadia, the biggest chicken company in Brazil. Sadia. I speak Portuguese too. I learned that in school, in my graduate school. So when I graduated, I had an MIM, International Management, with Portuguese. So in this lab wanted to start the wholly owned subsidiary in Brazil and manufacture vaccines down there. And they didn't tell me you're going to do gain of function and we're going to send these guys down there to get you guys started. But I'm sure that's what would have happened. And my wife stopped it all because she didn't want to live in South America. Like I said, when we dated, she agreed to it. I told her I wanted to take my family abroad and raise them with culture and bilingual. And we'll come back to the States and get a good job after that. She was like, ooh, yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. And then I actually achieved it. I did it. You know how you create your future, you think about it. We live in a vibrating universe where we're just made of vibrating quarks and gluons that are millions of multiples apart and empty space. And if we tune just right frequency, we can just go right through things and create whatever we want and change all the pixels that are coming in our future. Can incorporate everything that's us, everything around us, everything we see, touch, know, has to be replicated on the fly live. I think of it as like coming out of a sphere. If you had a little dot where everything comes out of that in every direction to set up your entire life, everything you experience with all your 5 senses, whether it overlaps with other people's. Think of it as like a game. Like a 3D computer game, but it's godly, and it's at this super cross frequency where the Earth's frequency is mixed perpendicular with the frequency of Sirius, is what I believe, because Sirius is always over the North Pole, and I think the gravity shoots across the Earth and holds us down, and it's a flux. Flux is the difference. It's like the delta. Flux is the difference between the Earth frequency and the Sirius frequency. And when you put them together, you create an over unity generator. And I'm getting into my theory on the Earth. I think the Earth is probably, if it's not flat, it's a lot bigger in diameter than the figures that NASA gives us. Because I'm an economist, which means I'm a high mathematician. And I've studied a lot of physics. If you're into high math, you've had a lot of physics homework. So like they'll show you an equation or a function used to determine something for a certain group or a certain application in a genre of engineering with machinery or the Earth or people in the Earth or people in the sky or space. And then you if you put, the theory is over unity means if unity is one-on-one. Think of a car. If you had the engine shaft coming out mating with the transmission, and then that transmission shaft drives all the gears that you shift. If the transmission main shaft is equal with the machine shaft, the motor crankshaft, then that's unity. People when they do horsepower tests, they try to get to unity. The best is closest the gear closest to unity might be fourth or fifth gear. If you have an overdrive, overdrive might be under. It might be a multiple of close multiple, like 1 point. I don't know what overdrives are now, 1.7. Or the opposite of that, like 0.6, 0.7. See, I can just throw numbers around in my head because I've had 600 level math classes. Think about how much you hated math in high school, and then you get into college and they're already doing algebra. And then I went all the way to, after my senior level, I went into master's level math and took 500 and 600 level math classes. So, like I said, they'll show you the function, and then you have to learn all about the physics and the chemistry and the application in the industry. And so you learn a lot. I didn't only learn economics because of the math. Those homework questions most of the time were in physics. They did give you some economic examples, but the thing is, in high math, economists are high mathematicians because you can forecast and try to find trends, and you got exponential moving averages when they cross, and you're looking at ribbons of different streams of data and always calculating and doing. I took calculus-based statistics. Can you imagine that? Take your calculus class and your statistics high-level class and throw them together. I remember one time we had this problem that the professor had. It went all the way across the chalkboard and down. And he said, I want the answer to that tomorrow. It was actually he had his own textbook. He wrote the math textbook this was in calculus-based statistics. And I remember at home, I did that equation. It took me like 3 pages doing all the fractions and canceling and squaring and moving my calculator to get the little in bits. You know, it's funny, like the in bits, if you have a fraction that says 113 divided by 27,895, you're not going to know. So the professor, they'll be writing on the board and they'll say, what's that? And everybody in the class got their calculator and they'll give him the in bits. That's just like one in bit of a formula you're going across the chalkboard. And, you know, he'll be just writing and he'll say, what's that one? Say 0.269. Okay, and he'll write in 0.269. You can bring your calculator to test because they know you have to do the in bits to get the decimals and the fractions, you know. You know what you're doing by the time you get past mathematics and algebra. They don't care what you bring. But it's like when I took my 400 level, what was it called? Something economics, econometrics. That just hurts to say. Feels like a cross going in my back. Dagger. It's econometrics. It's just got a spiky, like a penny needle stingy context, emotion to the name, econometrics. It was just, the guy would literally just write on 3 boards around the classroom. And he would say, this is the Chicago way. He came from Chicago University, which is the #1 economics university. And I remember that's where I learned how to do what I love to do now, which is regression. Economic regression, statistical regression lines, and you get the R squared. That's how you find out like a bunch of trend dots. People are doing things all over the place, and you can find a line that will shoot right through the middle of all of them to be the average action of all these multiple dimensional. And think of that not only in a 3D, but in all the way to the 11th dimension, going in all different directions as a mean average in those worlds or dimensions. So you get into all these equations, and physics has that too. But it gets deep. But that's only like 300 level math. You expand it in 400 level, but it's called multiple linear regression or ordinary least squares. You find a line where when you shoot that line, the sum what is it? If you square all of the numbers, and then you find the average of those numbers, what's the mean average of those numbers? And then the outliers become the ones that are away from the trend line. And then what's the square, and what's the least square that is ordinary? And that's your basic dot or line. That's your direction. It sounds a lot more scary than it seems, but you're trying to get a path, like a VOR in an airplane. So, back to South America. I lived in Argentina for 2 years as a missionary. Then I lived in Chile for those 6 months. But I traveled all over, chicken farms. I went to meetings for cosmetics. I went to meetings in New York City at Javits Center and convention halls all over the world, in a lot of resorts, like the Mar-a-Lago types, but in Brazil and Argentina, and even in different states inside the country, not just the port, not just the bay, not just the ocean side, but in the country. And I also went to Australia, New Zealand. I've been all over to every single farm for chickens with incubation equipment. When I started as a senior executive at this incubator company, they sent me out to meet all the clients. And so I went to Australia and went to every single hatchery where they put out chickens that anyone ate in all the states. Then we did the same thing in North Island, South Island of New Zealand. That was beautiful, driving around seeing all the countryside. But you know what gets me is growing up in Houston, in a big city, all of the towns in New Zealand are tiny. There's like, everybody's got to know everybody. They're just tiny cities with like a few streets. It looks like some of the little towns you drive through out when you get out in West Texas going to Lubbock from Dallas, and you find these little towns that are just like a neighborhood that was kind of built with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, and L Street, maybe 5 streets wide, and then same thing on the other side of the street, and then a gas station, and that's it. But they do the same thing in New Zealand. It's all over, and I don't know, it felt kind of claustrophobic to me. I don't know where the store is. I don't know where anything. You can't just go out. If you go out and go for a walk, you're just out in wilderness, just about. So, back to the topic. These guys have their own stories, like the Travis Walton story. Everybody knows the lumberjack that was in Arizona, that he and 5 other guys were in a big truck, like those International Harvester trucks, the big ones that carry crews, and they had all their logging equipment in the back. And when it was dark and they were driving down the logging path, and they saw a saucer in a clearing, and Travis got out and ran underneath it and got zapped, and they thought he was dead, and they took off. When they came back looking for him, he was gone. And the aliens took him and healed him, let him go 5 days later, and put him next to a phone booth naked. And that's the biggest story, probably, that's the most popular and the most solid. There were so many witnesses, and the way he came back, So then, in South America, you have 2 of them that are big. One of them in Chile, this guy in the military was gone for 15 minutes in front of his crew, his squad, doing an exercise. And when he came back, he had a full beard, and he was 5 years older. And they never figured out what happened to him. We'll get into that and read it and look at some short clips of it. And then the second guy, this is the more interesting one. In Brazil, this man got abducted by these aliens wearing suits. They were wearing like Frogger suits, the swimming under the ocean. And they had 3 tubes and everything. I think they were just like probably Nordic looking, good looking people underneath, but they're just wearing those like scuba suits. But they're baggy. And so they come out, and there's 3 that are obviously men, and there's a short one that's like shoulder height. to him. And then they take him, he starts to run, and the short one goes and catches him, grabs his arm, and they pull him back into the ship. Then they strip him down naked and they cover him with some slimy goo that dries and it's not oily. And then the door opens and this beautiful lady walks in. She's naked. And he describes her body. She's got long platinum blonde hair. She looks like a made up doll, with he says he was the most attracted to her he's ever been to a woman. And they copulate on the craft right there. They had the bed out ready and everything. So let's look at these stories here. Let me show you. First, I have to make sure you can see it. Restart capture. Okay. All right. You can see this. This is Armando Valdez.
Einstein famously said in his theory of relativity that time is relative. Video, we will examine a case where a Chilean man experienced this phenomenon, although time seemingly went faster, not slower, and there appears to be an extraterrestrial component leading to much speculation. In the early morning of April 25th, 1977, just outside Putre, Chile, 6 members of an army patrol unit were sitting around a campfire, telling stories and singing in order to remain awake. As 2 soldiers were standing guard, around 4 in the morning, one of the men who was standing guard, Private Rosales, ran back to unit leader Corporal Armando Valdez to report that they saw 2 bright violet lights in the hills nearby. One of the lights disappeared.
If you're in there,
towards
give me a
small
chat
hill,
for something to talk
while the
about if
other
you'd like to
moved
talk
to
about
the foot
something.
of a mountain. As it began hovering closer, Valdez told his men to cover the fire with blankets. It then began approaching and retreating in a strange manner as the unit watched. After around 3 minutes, Corporal Armando Valdez walked away from his companions and toward the light. There was no sound, and the Chilean high plateau was amazingly quiet. As this occurred, his unit watched in horror as their leader would seemingly disappear into thin air. The unit began searching for him, yelling, and after around 15 minutes, he suddenly reappeared. They heard their leader's voice as he begged for help, staggering toward them. He looked and seemed different, despite being clean-shaven just a short time ago. He now had a beard. In order to assist him, the bewildered team sat him near the fire. Then, a strange voice came from Valdez's mouth. He went on to say, "You will never know who we are, nor where we came from, but we will return." Unconscious, his men would try and help him until he awoke 2 hours later. After Valdez awoke, he recalled to his unit that he didn't remember anything from the moment he left the group. Things would only get stranger, though.
Yeah.
As he looked at his watch and ordered the group to move out, he let the unit know, being 4:30 a.m., it was time to go. His unit were perplexed, though, as it was actually 7 a.m. Even more confusing, his calendar watch had advanced 5 days to April 30th instead of being April 25th. The group was shooken, and soon the event would begin drawing attention. The initial investigation of the event was conducted by Pedro Arenada, a school teacher in Putre. Arenada was also the first person to encounter the confused and scared soldiers when they returned to Putre after the encounter. Arenada immediately returned to the scene of the incident with the witnesses.
What did the saucer do to
where
them?
he brought a tape recorder and interviewed all of them. He was later quoted saying, "I was surprised at the corporal's appearance. He had around 6 to 7 days growth of beard. I knew soldiers have to shave every day. It was obvious that the soldiers had been through some kind of extraordinary experience. Even 2 or 3 hours after it happened, they
You
were
ever
all
walk through a
still
wormhole?
in a state of complete shock.
It happens every day.
I would say near panic, and all the men told me the same story." As the event's
All the men
popularity
told
grew,
the same story.
the Valdez case would begin appearing in newspapers around the country, including some of the most prestigious. Soon, though, the Chilean military would begin to censor it somewhat, limiting interviews with the witnesses and stopping the majority of the various types of testing. Later in 2010, journalist and researcher Patricio Abusume took up the challenge of reinvestigating the case and interviewed the unit. This was described in his 300-page book.
I believe what they did was they
Noche
saw a saucer
de
that
los
came at
Sentinels.
them and was hovering over
In
them
his
and near
book,
them, and then this
It's a
guy
comprehensive look
somehow got into the
at
beam
initial reports as well as
and
thorough
disappeared
interviews.
for 15 minutes.
The book initially looked like the story was going to be somewhat straightforward until the Valdez.
Okay, let's look at another story.
Interestingly,
That's the Chilean dude. There's another case in Chile. This is a bizarre case.
And there is one I've been wanting to cover for a while now, and this case is extremely bizarre. On April 25th, 1977, 6 soldiers in Chile were resting at their camp after a long patrol when they saw 2 very bright lights coming down from the sky. And these soldiers, they had never seen anything like it before, so they just watched in awe and wondered, what could these lights possibly be? Then one of these lights started to approach their camp, and the other one disappeared behind the mountains. And these soldiers were scared as they watched this light just hover over the area. Then they saw it land not too far away from their camp. Now this light, or UFO, made no noise, and it moved very oddly. There was just something not right about it. So the leader of this patrol, Armando Valdez, went to go investigate. He wanted to find out what the heck this light was.
He was like the Travis Walton of the group.
He came back about 15 minutes later. He was extremely tired, wild-eyed, and somehow within that 15 minutes, he managed to grow a little beard. He also had a hard time walking, so the other soldiers helped him sit down. And in a trance-like state, he just stared into the distance. Then he said, "You don't know who we are or where we come from, but we will be back soon." Then he passed out. And also, when Valdez returned, the other soldiers saw the light fly back into the sky. Now these soldiers were scared and confused, and when Valdez woke up, he was still a little bit out of it, and he couldn't remember what had happened to him.
Like he was
and also he saw that his watch displayed that it was April 30th. But it wasn't the 30th, it was only the 25th. This case got a lot of attention from the media in Chile, and Valdez himself stated, "The surprising thing was the way this light approached us. As soldiers, we are trained to deal with any situation, but this phenomena didn't seem to have any logical explanation. I would like to regain my memory of those 15 minutes. I would even like to submit to hypnosis to draw out information about what had happened to me." Now, because this UFO sighting was getting so much attention, the president of Chile banned any further interviews, and this case was never talked about again, and it slowly faded away from the public's memory. Then many years later, a journalist started to look into this.
So you know what happened? They never solved it. they don't know what happened. So then this other guy, this Brazilian, let's go to the guy that got laid on the spaceship. This is the abduction of Antonio Vilas Boas. That's like Good Village. Antonio Vilas and Boas. Vilas, that's not like Villas. Let's see. But maybe in Portuguese. Let's see what this one is on. I set it to a time block. Uh-oh.
You said that you were watching it from
There.
a skull cup you're drinking whiskey from, so that's pretty rad.
All right, there you go, buddy. There you go. Images up.
Terrific. Thank you, my friend. Thank you very, very much. Okay.
Where is the story?
I'm coming home clean.
Right. I don't want weird little
He gets covered with like a slimy goo. It's like a total body
himself
condom
with his guts
cover.
turning
They just coated him
flip-flops
with
for what
latex
felt
or
like
something.
about a half an hour. After what felt like a new entity.
And then this naked woman
worries
came
as
in.
he's
Basically,
driving
they just abducted him and got him to impregnate the female.
This thing really
Yeah.
messed it up. It's like Chatbot wrote this fucking thing. So what that should have sounded like was this. And again, Preston,
I don't think these guys
Antonio
are showing,
tried
they're just
to
talking.
yell at the
Let me-
being and ask him just
I found one that tells the animated story. Let's go back. Let's make sure you have the screen capture. Yes, you have the screen capture. Okay, you see the mouse. Let me go back. Spartan, where are we at Spartan? Let's go back to this one. Okay, this one's fun, yeah.
As he struggled away, he was grabbed by 3 more taller figures in the same full-body suits, who lifted him off the ground. Vilas Boas struggled and yelled, and curiously, each time that he spoke, the 4 assailants stopped to look at his face.
4 assailants. 3 of them were
The suited
tall.
entities were each clothed in tight-fitting full-body jumpsuits made of thick gray cloth with a few black bands around the limbs. The suit joined a helmet of the same color, which revealed their light bluish eyes only through 2 round holes.
They had light blue eyes.
Their helmets seemed overly large above the eyeline. 3 silver-colored tubes the size of garden hoses came from the bottom of the back of their helmets and curved
They're
down to
those
fit into the
good-looking
back of the
aliens
suit.
that have the big eyes, the big blue.
In the center
slanted
of the
eyes.
chest was a small round red shield that reflected light, and a strip of silvery material joined the shield to a tight broad belt with no
Those
clasp or
people are
buckle.
always very nice to.
The sleeves blended into
They
thick
heal them.
5-fingered gloves of the same color,
Those are the ones that
and
know
the
how
pants
to heal
joined
human
seamlessly
beings.
to tennis-style shoes with soles that were 2 or 3 inches thick, and curved upwards at the toes.
She had tennis shoes on. Running shoes.
Vilas Boas was carried to the craft, which was sitting roughly 2 meters above the ground.
Yeah.
There was an open doorway towards the rear of the craft, with the door laying outward horizontally, like a castle drawbridge.
Good job.
There was a ladder hanging from the end of this drawbridge door, which appeared to be made of the same silvery metal as the craft's walls. The assailants forced Antonio onto the ladder, and he realized that it was somehow flexible and swung from side to side as he struggled.
Why did it swing? from
Taken
side to
inside
side?
the UFO, Antonio found himself inside a small square room made entirely of polished metal. At the top of the walls and in the ceiling were many small square lights set into the surface. The assailants set Antonio down as the door raised up and closed, blending so seamlessly with the walls around it that the frame could not be seen at all. There were 5 of the beings around him at this point, and one used a hand to signal Antonio to move to an open door opposite the entrance. Antonio entered into a much larger semi-oval shaped room with the same polished metal walls and lighting, and a column in the center. To one side of the room, Antonio saw an oddly shaped table surrounded by chairs like bar stools, all made of white metal.
It was like a bar. They were on bar
Antonio
stools.
stood waiting while the 5 entities appeared to speak to each other
They're
in what he
copying
described
humans.
as
They took
slow
him
barks
to a
and
bar on board
yelps.
the craft and sat around.
The
and
barking
brought in the hot
stopped,
chick.
and the assailants all grabbed him and started taking off his clothes. One of them then approached him with a
And the
soft,
dudes
wet
took off his
sponge,
clothes.
which it used to cover him in a thick, clear liquid that dried quickly and
Covered
wasn't
him
oily.
up. before.
3 of his assailants led him through a door opposite to where they had
Probably to
entered by
disinfect
pushing
him
something in
for
the
her.
middle, which caused it to open inwards in 2 halves. Above the door
See,
were
saloon
illuminated
doors.
red symbols,
You got bar
which appeared
stools
to
and
float
saloon
about 2
doors
inches
and a
in
red
front of the
light
door
above the
frame.
door.
Vilas Boas walked through the door into a
That red
squarish
sign
room,
and those
and once
alien
again, the door
characters
closed
probably
seamlessly
said
with the wall
bar.
around it.
They got saloon doors.
Shortly
and a red
after,
light above there
2
that
more of
says
the
something,
beings
and they
entered,
have bar
each carrying
stools,
a thick red tube with a glass.
and they bring in a hot chick to have sex with. It's like a bar. Mhm. Oh. Like a tourniquet. They just like cut him and sucked some blood out. But they didn't even have to cut him. They just stuck it to his chin. They just stuck a tube to his chin. They just stuck a tube to his chin and took his blood. With that, they didn't even say they cut him or had to make an incision.
Shaped large gray couch or bed. He eventually began to notice a smell that he compared to burning painted cloth,
So he
and
smelled
found
this.
that there were several metallic rods protruding from the
Burning
walls,
paint?
with many small holes in them emitting a gray smoke into the air.
And they gassed him with the drug. And he threw up. Jägermeister. Yeah. Or gin. Somebody probably gave him gin. That'll make you throw up if you drink too much gin. Blonde Brazilian women. Fantastic.
Her
Sorry
underarm
about
and
that.
pubic hair were blood red, and her arms were covered in freckles. She had big, elongated blue eyes that narrowed to fine points on the outsides and slanted downwards toward the middle. She had high cheekbones, a wide face, and a pointed chin, a slender body and a small waist, but wide hips and large thighs. Finally, she had small feet with long and narrow hands. Antonio estimated that the helmet would have brought her up to his chin, making him certain that this woman was the first assailant to grab him outside. The woman suddenly embraced Vilas Boas, rubbing her head against his face as he became more aroused than he'd ever been before. As the two had sexual intercourse, the woman grunted a few times, which made Antonio feel as though she were more
I like
animal
when they
than human.
grunt.
After he'd finished inside of her, the door opened again, and one of the suited figures appeared and called to the woman. Before leaving, she turned to face Antonio, pointed to her belly, pointed at him, then pointed up to the sky with a slight smile on her face. Next, one of the beings returned Antonio's clothes and led him back to the oval room, where the being joined 3 other crew members now sitting on the stools. There was a third doorway in the room that was slightly ajar, and in the room beyond, Antonio could hear noises like a person shuffling around. He also noticed that on the table was a square box with a glass lid, protecting what appeared to be a clock face. Like a clock, it had a hand, and black marks at the 3, 6, and 9 o'clock positions, and 4 little marks in a row at 12. Antonio saw one of the entities glance at this object a few times, but he never saw the hand move. When Antonio grabbed the device off the table, the nearest being darted over and snatched it from him, placing it back on the table. Eventually, one of the entities got up and signaled for Antonio to follow him. The pair walked through the room they'd originally entered from, and out the exterior door, then along the catwalk that wrapped around the craft. There were reddish square lamps embedded along the hall, where Vilas Boas saw purple ones before. The entity pointed out the 3 metal spikes at the front of the craft. At this time, they were glowing a pale red. The catwalk stopped ahead of a large, thick sheet of murky glass that appeared to be a windshield. The crew member pointed up to the top of the craft where the big disc was slowly rotating, now illuminated by a greenish fluorescent light, and Vilas Boas could hear a whining sound like a vacuum cleaner.
She had to clean up the room after
The
they
pair
left.
returned to the entrance, and the crew member gestured for Antonio to descend the ladder. Back on the ground,
Uh-oh, that means he wanted him. He was a homosexual alien. Wow. The doors disappear. That's weird. I've seen that. I've seen two saucer craft take off with all the multicolored. They're in lines underneath when it takes off. Somebody disconnected my battery. Uh-oh. Let me restart your capture.
30 that afternoon.
Sorry about that.
At which point he felt well enough to eat dinner.
Well, we've seen that story.
But the following nights,
What do you think?
his dreams replayed the disturbing events,
What do you think about that story?
headaches,
This
and loss of
capture
appetite.
keeps stopping.
The second night, he felt a burning sensation in his eyes, which grew worse the next
I'm going to
day.
have to try it different.
For the next month, he felt excessively sleepy, even drifting off during the day. The day after his abduction ended, Antonio returned to the landing site and measured the lengths between the 3 indentations left in the ground.
Yeah.
From this, he was able to determine that the craft was around 10.6 meters, or 35 feet long,
35.
and 7 meters, or 23 feet wide at the rear.
It's a big one.
8 days after the incident, Antonio bumped his forearm, resulting in a bruise and bleeding, which became infected and itchy, and left a purple patch around it when it healed.
The one I saw was about 20.
In the following 10 days, Antonio found similar wounds appear spontaneously on his forearms and legs, each of which left behind a purple patch that remained for months. 15 days after the incident, a pale yellow spot appeared on each side of his nose.
He started to get sick from the radiation.
In November 1957, Vilas Boas read
Sexually
João Martin's
transmitted
article on
fever.
Brazilian UFOs in the weekly magazine O Cruzeiro. He wrote 2 letters to Martins and sent a wood model of the UFO that he'd carved. A little over 4 months after the incident, on February 22, 1958, Vilas Boas met with Martins and physician and ufologist Dr. Olavo T. Fontes in Rio de Janeiro. Martins and Fontes recorded over 4 hours of cross-examination, and Dr. Fontes also conducted a medical evaluation.
Wow.
But he could not explain the 2 small hypochromic patches on his chin, or the purple patches around his wounds. Years later, Dr. Fontes said he felt that the symptoms were due to radiation poisoning. However, their meeting was too late to conduct blood tests to confirm this. Sometime ahead of their February meeting, Vilas Boas had sketched a reproduction of the unusual red lettering above the doorway, and included it in a letter to Martins.
That looks like a pizza restaurant.
Years later, a Brazilian doctor named Walter Buehler sent a copy to linguist and
You
ufologist
have some
Gordon
PDF
Creighton, but it's
files.
unknown how Buehler obtained the sketch, and it's impossible to determine if it's the
It either
original.
says bar.
At some point in this visit, Antonio
Or
also sketched a drawing of the
chicken.
UFO. After the interrogation, Martin said that he wouldn't be able to publish the story in O Cruzeiro due to lack of evidence and lack of similar accounts. In the end,
It's just like
Fontes believed Vilas Boas' story, while Martins didn't. Creighton felt that Fontes and Martins had made some agreement to not publish the story at the behest of some US or Brazilian security or intelligence service.
Yeah.
In July 1961, Buehler and Dr. Mario Prudente Aquino traveled to São Francisco de Sales and had Vilas Boas draw 2 more sketches of the craft. Buehler used the testimony to write about the case in his personal bulletin and shared it with the Brazilian Society for the Study of Flying Saucers, as well as the Flying Saucer Review, which
That's a
declined to
weird-looking
publish on the
saucer. It
case.
wasn't just a regular round disc.
However, Gordon Creighton wrote a series of articles for Flying Saucer
had
Review
appendages
beginning in
that came out.
1965. Around the
And it
same
was the hotter
time,
looking
the
being.
case was
Look
covered
for
in
the
Eau
saucers that have
Cruzeiro.
things sticking out of them, and it's the hot.
Creighton eventually compiled all the information for a chapter in The Humanoids, published in 1969. Vilas Boas had a lasting fear that the woman's gestures meant that he would be captured again and taken to the being's home.
No, she don't
But
want
he was
you.
calmed by Dr.
Dude,
Fontez's
she's like a Swiss
suggestion
woman. They
that it
just
meant
take
that she
the
was going to
child
bear
and
his
kick her
child
out.
where she lived. Antonio married within a few years of the incident and had several children, and he eventually became a lawyer. He refused all further interviews until he agreed to appear on Brazilian television in 1978 to correct several inaccurate retellings.
He has a baby living in space.
Otherwise, he hadn't discussed his experience
Well,
in detail, not even with family.
Not space as you would think.
He
of it,
maintained the
far
veracity
away
of his
space.
account
Probably in a
until his
different
death on
space Earth,
January
maybe in a
17,
different dimension.
1991.
Just as close as they are. Somewhere on
The
Earth.
story of Vilas Boas was largely
They
disbelieved
have
in
to
its
be
own
somewhere in
time, but after the Betty and Barney
somewhere
Hill
on the
case of
circumference of this
1961
Earth.
brought the phenomenon of alien abduction
In a
to
place
popular
that
attention,
maybe
it was
steps
clear
into
that
a
his
different
case was a forerunner.
frequency or dimension.
Just as in the case of Vilas
It's
Boas,
like radio station.
Betty
We're
and
all
Barney
here,
Hill
but
saw a
we just can't see
UFO
it.
before being apprehended by alien beings and led aboard a landed craft. Pregnancy was a theme in
But I
both
think
accounts,
physically they
with
also
Betty
live
being
somewhere
tested
else.
for it. And many more abductees or experiencers have reported sexual intercourse with apparently alien beings, or alien-human hybrids. Hybrid reproduction was a common theme in stories collected by abduction researchers in the 1980s and 90s, including John Mack.
Don't they know they can get so many volunteers in the world? You know, they gotta know that. If you tell some man, take you on a vehicle where you're gonna see probably the most attractive woman in your life, but she's just got funny eyes and she grunts. And her pubic hair and her armpit hair are redhead. She's a redhead, but she's got platinum blonde hair. But red pubes. That's what he said. Bright red pubes and bright red armpit hair. Like blood red. Do you imagine if he got an STD from that alien woman and his wife? You know what he could do? He could have contacted Epstein and gotten some antibiotic pills to sneak into her food and see if he could drug her with some antibiotics or a treatment for the sexually transmitted disease infection he was going to possibly give her in the future, so he could sneak the medicine into her and have her take the medicine to get rid of what I gave her without having to tell her, is what he said. Should say. That guy looks a lot like Bill Gates. I was in some programs as a kid that were started by intelligence, like the Vanguard program in Houston, and I went to a school where we had unstructured classes with advanced teachings, like in 4th and 5th grade. Uh-oh. Let me restart it for you.
9 pages of documents were published on the UFO Reality blog, which detailed Reynolds' discussion with Nedeljkovic.
I keep having to watch the screen restart capture because
In his
sometimes the
tell-all
encoder
report
just
on
freezes
UFOs in
and then it'll go off
1956,
and send me a
Captain
chat
Edward
if it-
Ruppelt of the U.S. Air Force said that at the
screen
time,
freezes. I'm
all
watching the
reports of UFO landings
restart
in contact
capture
with
button.
entities were automatically
If it
marked
stops
CP
playing
for
for you, I hit
crackpot.
it. But if I'm not paying attention,
Vilas Boas's report
something.
was thus largely disbelieved in its own time, but it helped pave the way for the public's acceptance of the Betty and Barney Hill abduction in 1961.
Betty and Barney Hill. He was a mailman.
The story that Vilas Boas told was in many ways an early example of the kinds of abduction narratives seen in the later 20th century, and was the first to present the world with the shocking implication that some of these alien or extra-dimensional beings might be breeding with the human race.
Abduction noted in America that's real is the Barney Hill. He was a black man. That's the first one. His wife was white. Think I'm ominous. But that was a cool video about the story. But can you
Help
imagine
support
that?
quality videos on anomalous phenomena. Pledge a monthly donation to Think Anomalous on Patreon, or donate by PayPal or buy me a
so
coffee.
You know who did that? That's Think Anonymous.
Think Anomalous is created by Jason Charbonneau.
Think Anomalous.
Research by Clark Murphy. Music by Josh Chamberlain.
That's the page. Think Anomalous. Not analogous. Anomalous. All right. There's Kill Tony. Bert Kreischer. Rick Ingram. Bert Kreischer. Poor Bert Kreischer. His comedy's crashing. He's empty nested now. His kids aren't home anymore. He's kind of wearing out his machine story that he's been doing almost for 20 years now. It just has made him millions and millions of dollars. But he won't eat healthy or stop drinking. And keeps talking about blood pressure and heart attack, but he's doing IVs, and he's doing those health IVs like Rogan does and all those people, and they go together and they go get an IV, and then they say, yeah, I felt great yesterday, I did the IV, and with, it's full of vitamins and stuff. But why the hell do that? Why go around and stick stuff in your arm? Because you drank all day. You drink all day, so then you stick something in your blood to make it healthy, and it's full of alcohol. It's like it's 2% alcohol. You've got 2% of your blood is alcohol, or 3 or 5%, and then you stick vitamins in it. But he's always drinking. He doesn't even say he stops drinking. He's just, oh no, I drank. He'll admit he's an alcoholic. But he's the healthiest alcoholic, and he looks great, and he exercises, and he's just really lean and slim and fantastic. And he's not. He's just still fat. The doctor said he had 90 pounds of fat just in his belly. So 90 pounds of him is just the belly. And a doctor measured that. He said that on his, I just saw that day before yesterday on YouTube. On one of the comedy. I watch a lot of comedy stuff, and I write comedy jokes. I like to do that. Let me make sure you're still here. I have to go back and guard that capture. Yeah, you're still here. As long as when I can see my cursor on your screen, that's when I know the capture is still going. Let's look at, we looked at Chile, we looked at Brazil. Here's one in Brazil. I was in, when I went down and I was doing my busking, I met a man named George in the restaurant district, and he managed Jorge, and he managed Italian restaurant. And we would talk, and he played guitar, and I would show him my guitar, and he would play songs. He was better than me, man. He blew me away. He was also a luthier. He made guitars. And he was telling me about UFO stories there's a man in southern Chile that went aboard the white, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, good-looking ones, came out and took a sick man and healed him. Took him somewhere underground, or they went to a place where there was a rock, and kind of the rock opened up with one of those doors like he's talking about in that last video, where there's nothing there, and suddenly a door opens and swings open with like saloon doors, and you go through, but when it shuts, there's nothing there. It's not even like a dot. It's just not there. They put doors wherever they want them, and just whatever it is just opens up. And it's really strange. And so Jorge was telling me about one day he was in the Bella Vista, and he said he heard a voice in his head tell him, look up, we're up here. And he looked up, and there was a huge spacecraft, one kind of like a mothership that would take a lot of beings in it. And it was just very large, and it was hovering over Santiago, just going straight over Bella Vista, really slow, like a balloon. slower than a blimp on idle. He said, and he just watched it, and they were communicating with him telepathically, and he could just feel their warmth, and they were happy, and they were just observing the activity there. But how many people looked up and saw that? I would suppose there were many other witnesses that day, if you asked or announced it on television or something. But I don't know if that hit the TV. But so he was telling me there were all kinds of UFO abduction stories and things that go on with the gray aliens down in Chile. And so they're aware of that topic too. Chileans on average, your average Chilean, the generations of today, let's say the younger ones that are in their 20s or less, their parents were conspiracy theorists, and their parents lived under the dictator regime when it was ugly and rough, when they had nothing and everything was controlled by government or their security administration, like their FEMA, Homeland Security, under disaster emergency. And they even became a fifth world country when I was studying. There was third world, fourth world, and then fifth world was just super poor conditions with no rights and not much going on. Two different dictators they had. And so then that's where, when MK Ultra was coming out with mind control and the studies like up in McGill University and the CIA stuff that they were doing with, of all different types. There's electronic, there's chemical, there's traps, honey traps, with women. And they started that in San Francisco with the ladies of the night, with the Johns coming, and they would dose them with LSD and get information. There's always the technology for that. So what was I talking about? Anyway, these alien abduction experiences are widely known as far as people having the same experiences, the ones that are reported in our country. The details line up. The things that they do are the same. It's not wildly different. And it seems like there is this class of beings that visits quite frequently to humans on Earth. And they're beautiful blonde people with large blue eyes. Unusually large, kind of slanty, cartoonish, like anime eyes. That would be interesting to see. Especially if she just comes in, starts snuggling with you, and you get super excited. He said he was very attracted to her more than any other woman before. I think it was the gas, whatever gas they gave him, probably made him say that or think or feel that way. He's probably the biggest he's ever been down there. And but what was I going to show you? This video on, have you ever heard of Friendship Island? It's called Isla Amistad in Chile, and it's further south. It's way south where there's a bunch of mountains and canyons and keys, and it's not all the way down to the tip, but it's kind of in the middle way down. And it's a big bay area with lots of canyons that go in, closed box canyons that go in like spidered out. And there's a little city there, and there's an island, and it's called Friendship Island. And the people that live there are very much like, if you picture what we've seen of Hawaiian Islands, when you go past Maui and some of the smaller little dotty islands that are off Hawaii, and the people that live there are only, there may be 100 houses, and that's it. And they don't have electricity. They don't have any sewer or anything like that. They just live all natural. They have kind of nice houses built, but they have strange ways to, they have to dig in and make their own sewer traps and that work for the town and keep the sewer out of the water. And then the electricity comes from generators, and then they have to pay the generators. And there's what they eat and all their supplies have to be flown in, flown out. They have to do a lot of trade with people off the island, but they're just little villages that don't. This one on Isla Amistad is just a real small. I think it's in the video. I'm going to show you now the UFO story of Isla Amistad, which is what they say is the place where the blonde, blue-eyed, platinum-haired, good-looking ones live, and they heal people. If they choose you, I love them. Choose me, choose Alex Aquarius. And they'll just fix things that are wrong with you, which would be great. And let's look at this one. Where was it? Let's see. That's Admiral Byrd's Operation High Jump. If you've seen that, I'm not sure. Let me know in the chat. Don't see any chats in there yet. If you're here, say something, please. Let me know how the sound is. Does anyone know who Admiral Byrd is? Let me play that real quick. He was the guy who went to Antarctica, and he got an air battle. He went down there with the aircraft carrier and some ships and flight, and they were gonna find the German colony down there and bust it up. Was their plan. And when they got there, they had UFO saucers coming at them, shot a couple of their. I think they lost 2 of their planes. Another plane, they said, flew into a wall. They said it flew off away from the airport where they were at toward where they thought the base was. And there were witnesses that saw it just hit like an invisible wall. It just smashed to pieces and fell out of the sky. So there is some dome, technology there. Keep you out and keep people in. So they live in a different, there's like advanced civilizations, breakaway civilizations. So the Admiral Byrd was going to go down there, and they found out these suddenly out of the ocean water, flying saucers came, but they had swastikas on them like they were of the Third Reich. Third Reich means third kingdom. The third world to them was to, move into because they were already communicating with the aliens that helped them. And actually, I think it was the blonde heads that helped probably the Germans. And because when they were asked, Werner von Braun said they were taught by the entities from space, from the other worlds, I think he said. So that's where the technology came from. And that's why the Germans have the reputation of being so crafty and precise, the precision of the German engineering, like the BMWs have such tight engineering, the way all the panels fit on the car to where every part is placed in the car and all the wiring and everything. It's just magnificent and perfect. And I would bet today everything is more uniform with all of the technology and the 3D printing and the cutting and the CNC things that they can do with CNC cutting. I used to work in a company that made incubators, large steel equipment, and we had CNC tables that would draw up something with circles and cuts all over on a Pro CAD system. There was another system we used, not CAD, but it drove production, and you could, let's say we would sit in a meeting and say, what if we took the pitman arm, which is like, a train when it pushes the wheel that goes around that drives the train, and you see it taking off, it goes, that arm that comes out, that piston, is called the pitman bar. Let's say if we made the pitman bar longer or shorter, would we get more torque or better speed? Or in the incubator, you have like a pitman bar that pulls the rack 45 degrees this way, and the other end you have a crank that sits out, and then each tray level is connected to that cranking system, and you have to turn the eggs every hour. So you have a crank that goes whoop this way and a crank that goes that way. So then you have to have a machine that at the bottom that has all the buggies tied together like trains, and then a big arm that swings the bar back and forth to the pitman bar. And then they all turn. So I learned a lot about manufacturing and engineering, and why am I talking about Pittman bars? Richard E. Byrd fought spaceships with the Nazis down there. Let's see what they say on this. Let me make sure you have the screen capture. Yeah, it froze again. So I'm trying to contact OBS on that. He was a Freemason too.
In the series of reports entitled The Quest for the Inner Passage,
Up the volume.
it was noted that Admiral Byrd's family is part of the elitist crowd through kinship with England's royal family. Byrd himself was a 33rd degree Freemason, and a veil of secrecy has covered his expeditions from the start. As one biographer put it, there were secrets that would not be talked about. And not surprisingly, one World Order paymaster, John D. Rockefeller, and his pals had financed all of Byrd's early explorations, with the exception of Operation High Jump, which was financed by the United States Navy. Were occult secret societies of both the United States and Germany locked in a competition to rediscover Atlantis?
It wasn't public either. It was like a redacted military operation that nobody knew about.
In 1928, Byrd and his pilot, Bernd Balken, had dropped Masonic flags on both poles. Balken also added his shrine Fez. In the Antarctic expedition of 1933, 60 of its 82 members were Freemasons, and on February 5, 1935, Byrd established the first Antarctic Lodge, number 777, of the New Zealand Constitution.
They're high up. And they were throwing Masonic flags out on the ice. That's what starts everything.
And just as Roosevelt had predicted, the whole world was at war by December of 1941.
Everything we think.
Yet despite Hitler's astounding military success in conquering virtually all of Europe, Allied forces rallied together in a desperate four-year conflict that ultimately served a crushing defeat to his German Reich. As of May 8, 1945, the defeated German military had surrendered. But had Hitler's Third Reich actually surrendered as well? And moreover, was the war with Germany truly over? Or had it simply completed the opening phase,
controlled by secret people? You see, we didn't win World War II. We agreed to take on 3,000 of their top people and then rebuild Germany. Let me
sums of money, advanced technologies, scientists, and technicians out of Europe before Germany was forced to capitulate. Provided this operation could secure its own lands, weapons, and money, it could function as an off-the-books power unto itself. The
Fourth Reich.
Over the course of the war, the Nazi SS had already evolved into an autonomous state unto itself within the Third Reich. Armed with an astounding array of military wonder weapons, supersonic jet aircraft, flying wings, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and allegedly flying saucers. All technologies unmatched by Allied defenses.
They already had flying saucers.
As well, construction of a top-secret device called Die Glocke, the Bell, was underway at a hidden complex in Poland. Rumors claim that once activated, this device could levitate, but considering Hitler's desperate demands for an apocalyptic wonder weapon to annihilate Germany's enemies, it seems more likely that, rather than an exotic flying machine, it was intended as a plasma weapon, infinitely more destructive than even a hydrogen bomb.
But it flew away.
But this project never reached completion, and by the end of the war, the Bell and all of its designers had vanished, likely under the supervision of General Hans Kammler, who possessed exclusive control over the Bell.
I heard stories about the Bell when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, or early on. I heard about this Nazi Bell that was, there may have been a movie about it, but they said there that bell, it looked like Liberty Bell, but it was stuffed with machinery that made it levitate, and it was either supposed to carry bomb material or plasma or a laser or do something. And but I think when they started it up, it was like throwing a frisbee that never came back, and it just goes wherever it wants to, and it goes through time. I think it showed up in the east somewhere like Pennsylvania, and it went in a field, and people saw it and were gonna dig it out. It looked like it was stuck, but then they left. When they came back, it was gone. I think it just keeps going. It won't die, and it goes through around the world, but I think it goes through time. It goes in the future. And let me turn it back on here. It's interesting.
As well as all SS Wunderwaffe projects. As a protege of SS Chief of Staff Heinrich Himmler, Kammler had earned a reputation with his skills for rapid deployment and implementation of underground manufacturing facilities and vast mobilization of slave labor consignments from concentration camps, the very skills required for supervising construction of an emergency refuge at the South Pole, Neuschwabenland. Of course, by April 17, 1945, Kammler and all of his most sophisticated secret weapons projects had vanished altogether from Europe. To escape capture, this cunning, shrewd, and lethal opportunist, marked as a prized war criminal, is said to have committed suicide, but more likely he cleverly escaped from Germany aboard a lumbering six-engine Junkers 390 America bomber, bound for an unknown destination.
Maybe that's where they came up with the name Junker. It was a brand name of airplanes in Germany.
Sir Roy Fedden, leader of a technical mission to Germany for the British Ministry of Aircraft Production, stated,
"Would you like your name
I have seen enough of their designs and production plans to realize that if they had managed to prolong the war some months longer, we would have been confronted with a set of entirely new and deadly developments in air warfare."
But now we're talking about man-made
Although the German
UFOs
armed
and
forces had
technology.
surrendered to the Allies in 1945, technically speaking, the Third Reich itself had not capitulated.
So what I'm getting to in my show here is we started out talking about the Chilean that got phased by that saucer, and in 15 minutes he went like 5 years. He had a whole story, I think, that came out through hypnotic regression, but then they forbade him to do anymore. They made it illegal to do hypnotic regression so that he would not find out and tell where he was or what happened. They just did not want to know. That's when you're leading a country, the people of a country, you don't want them to revolt and rebel because some man went off in time and found out something in the future and is going to say that you're going to tumble and everything's going to change. You better just forbid hypnotic regression and not let that guy go back and figure out what happened. But when he came back in 15 minutes, he had a full beard. Okay, so we covered that story if you just came in. And that was the story of, what was his name? Armando Valdez. If you look it up, that one's in Chile. Just look up UFO abductee in Chile, Armando Valdez, and you can read all about that. And this Rumble site I got this from is called Street of Silence. I would look on YouTube as well. They're probably there, called Street of Silence. And they're doing this report on the alien abduction of Armando Valdez. We were watching that, and then we went and we saw Corporal Armando Valdez UFO incident by the page Paranormal Junkie on YouTube. Paranormal Junkie jumps like a monkey. Yeah, see, the capture just froze when I said that. I said monkey. Doesn't like that, so what? Okay, now let's look at the Eden Hotel. I'm going to tell you about, I was there, right? See this hotel right here? I was there. When I was an LDS missionary, I went to this town called La Falda, and it's in Córdoba. If you go to Buenos Aires, when you land, in Argentina, most people, you fly into Buenos Aires. If you go west, the next province over to the west is called Córdoba. And Córdoba has a lot of towns in it. There's a lot of water resorts. It's a state that has a lot of lakes and water and fun. And there's a town, what was the one? It was all German. It's Carlos Paz. I think it was the name of it. There's Carlos Paz, and then there's La Falda. And La Falda is where this hotel was built like in the late 1800s and then renewed in 1907 or something. And then some elite person bought it, and it became like a center of entertainment and people in the area building business and everything. And now the town was really bustling. And then something happened to the town and the industry, and the hotel fell apart and it went derelict. And it was all run down and ransacked, and just the structure stood. And that's when I saw it. And this family bought it, called the Eichhorn or Eichhorn. It's, I've seen that name in the Philippines, the EICH, sometimes double H, EICHHORN, Eichhorn or Eichhorn. This family spells it with one H, EICHORN. They were friends with Hitler, or assigned by the SS or the government of Germany to put Hitler up in this hotel. Him and Ava were there. He and Ava. And the way I found out, it was 1985, and I was 20. And I went to this La Falda, and I went to a family's home, and we took the children over to the church in the afternoon. I think it was a Saturday. There was some activity. And we let the Eichhorn children come. And we walked past this hotel, and it was all run down and just looked like an old, huge abandoned structure, and they said that was their dad owned that hotel. That's our hotel. My dad owns that. Oh, really? Wow. Yeah, my granddad owned it, and Adolf Hitler stayed here. And I was like, really? Adolf Hitler? Yeah. Yeah, he's friends with my grandpa, and he stayed here. Mm-hmm. And these kids, this was 1985, and these kids were like 7, 8, 9. I think there was an 11-year-old. And they were just matter of fact. Yeah, Hitler stayed here with my grandpa, Eichhorn, and Ava was here too. And I asked another missionary who'd been in that town a lot longer than before I just arrived. And I said, the Eichhorn children said their Hitler stayed with their grandfather in this hotel. And he goes, oh yeah. He goes, everybody in town knows that. I was like, what? And there were a lot of people in town that spoke German. And so much so that when I was a missionary in Argentina, I considered buying a German language course so that I could start studying German in my free time back at the apartment. And because we ran into so many people that spoke German, we were actually picking up German and speaking German, a little German on my mission. It was that heavy. I met that many Nazis. And I remember this one guy, his last name was Lizarralde, L-I-Z, Lizarralde. And he was a big, tall, strong-looking, blue-eyed, strong man, and he was very tough. And you could just see it in his eyes, the misery and the evil things that he did or saw. And he would just sit there. And even when he was happy, he was just kind of like depressed in his thoughts. You could just tell him, yeah. He would smile and just like something was eating at him. You could just tell the man the entire time. He was very nice and cordial and social and pleasant to us. And we were teaching his wife. His wife was the trophy wife. She had all this jewelry, and she had a very low, smoky voice. She's like, oh, elders, ven acá, por favor, con la familia, vamos a comer. Ven acá. Voy a servirles una torta. ¿Ok? Está bien. Un momento. ¿Dónde está la leche? Da, 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 da. And she would just run around, and she came to church, and I don't know if she baptized or not, but we took her to church. But we took a lot of people around there, Nazis, and met the Eichhorn children. People who own it today, they remodeled it. And they've got it where it's...
Former German army officer named Roberto Valk acquired the Estancia at La Falda and, thanks to forming a partnership and acquiring credits, built the famous Hotel Edian.
Is that too loud? in 1897.
In 1905, the partnership was dissolved and the Hotel Edion was placed under the management of the German businesswoman Maria Herbert de Krotner, who definitively became the sole owner in 1912. That same year, the businesswoman sold the estancia at La Falda along with the hotel and went to Germany, where she suffered the misfortune of living through World War I.
It was just this ugly, dark, abandoned, ransacked. People stole everything, all the features, all the lights, all the derelict. I would have loved to have gone into it when it was derelict. We should have done that if we stayed there. But,
in 1920, after World War I ended, Mrs. Maria Herbert de Krotner returned from Germany to oversee the collection of the debts owed to her by the new owners, the Orn brothers, who by then had already divided up part of the estancia into plots, giving rise to the town of La Falda.
La Falda. That means the skirt. La Falda is a skirt. La Falda. They have meals that are made like the tortillas that are out big, or they call that the skirt. They have like La Falda tortillas. And that hotel's beautiful. Can you believe, I saw it, it was just in this little, in the 80s. The homes weren't all that nice around there. And it was just really
During this decade, one of the Ehorn brothers and his wife would travel to Germany on a regular basis, where they would listen to Adolf Hitler speak at a beer hall and be captivated by him. At that precise moment, they decided to contribute financially to his campaign and began a friendship with him. In the early 1930s, Eichhorn and his wife were sending large sums of money to Germany to support the Nazi Party.
They closed. The door's never tight. Dust comes
Meanwhile, in the small town on the slopes, the bond between the owners of the Eden Hotel and Hitler was beginning to resonate among the locals.
It's kind of like the gate, when you build a gate and fence around your house, and sometimes you have a nice gate. You don't want the gate sagging on its frame, dragging in the grass. That's what the doors are like in Argentina. They like saloon doors,
in
but they creak and
1945,
they're woody.
well into World War II, the
out.
fall of Germany was imminent, so on March 27, 1945, Argentina declared the Eden Hotel as enemy property of the state.
Yep, I walked right along those steps. I never went up, I never stepped on
The country seized the property of the Eichhorn brothers, but in 1947, then-President Juan Domingo Perón returned the hotel to the brothers,
He said
who
Eichhorn.
immediately decided to sell it and disappear
This
from
guy's
public life.
grandkids I took to primary activity. Isn't that funny? My friends call me the Forrest Gump of conspiracy. 'Cause I've either worked for the labs or know the kids that
At this
were
time,
friends with
the
Hitler,
decline of the Hotel Edion would
grandfather,
begin.
or lots of other
It
stories.
was
you're
passed
gonna
from
hear.
one company to another.
Wait till this channel I start telling
Its assets were
stories.
auctioned off, going through a profound period of crisis until its doors were closed as a hotel forever.
Eichhorn. That's Eichhorn. I remember writing it on my paper. Took Eichhorn. We had a weekly report that went to the president.
Finally, in 1960, the former hotel was acquired by Armando Balvin, who in 1971 tried to convert the building into a casino.
Looks
but the
like
idea
somebody
did not
else bought the
prosper, and he
hotel. I
abandoned
talked
the
to
old Hotel Edion to
grandchildren,
its
but
fate.
I don't think their grandfather owned it anymore. He sold it.
After this, years and decades of abandonment and neglect,
Eichhorn
looting,
sold it
destruction, and vandalism would follow. The hotel, which once gave life to the town of La Falda, would end up being part of a past that no one would remember.
Yeah, I went there after the dictatorship. war in the Falklands.
In
I went there a
2007,
year after
the old
Falklands,
Hotel
man.
Edion
It
was
was
declared a
kinda like
historical
this
monument of the
neighborhood.
city of La Falda and was put out to tender to a local businessman who decided to
They had a
recover
lot
this
of
sleeping
communists and
giant.
people fighting if you weren't a communist, and they did not like Americans.
Today, the
We had
hotel once
people
again
threatening
welcomes
to kill
curious
us.
tourists who want to learn the hidden history of an old building whose
There's the
walls
fire.
have much to tell.
It was all beat up like a bullshit. Yeah, I remember the statues in the park kind of overgrown. You could tell it was some great, wonderful building at one point in time. It was like looking at the past, like a shipwreck. Your station. Looks like they had private cabanas or something.
Grande snacks.
They have little private off-campus cabanas, I guess.
Here we find more cardboard to put on to see if it catches fire. With a little fernet. You know I'm not much of a fernet
That
person,
reminds
but
me
the
so
girl
much of
here makes
Argentina.
such
Even when you're
delicious
in nice
drinks.
places, they just have
Focus,
cement walls
Marty.
like that. Before if they don't paint, like you paint your walls white, even if you have
Let's see what
sheetrock,
happens.
It's got the pebbly sand
She's
pebble
leaning
finish.
back, but it seems to me that she needs more.
They just have those
Marty,
cement
there it
walls.
is. It's lighting up, huh? We
Like
keep
that.
fighting. I think we have to put this on.
What do you
your
say?
bedroom and the
I'll
walls.
put it up
If you
there.
don't put up a
Marty,
painting
I'll put
or
it
a
on.
poster,
No,
you just have
I'll
cement
support
walls.
it
You can
there.
paint
I'll
them,
support
but
it
the
there.
paint, water-based
There
paint
it
soaks
is.
into the cement. Fades.
Remember, that firewood is going to catch fire and this coal is going to work.
If you put wood up at an angle,
Now,
just like
look
he's
at that
doing,
fire,
and make it
please.
teepee-shaped, you'll get a big raging fire. And
Spectacular,
also, if you make
impeccable.
stack the logs like a donut,
Mr.
and
Mott
put
had a colony
newspaper
with
down
his
the
social
middle,
networks in the
you'll
description.
have a raging fire that looks
Traveler,
like a jet engine.
influencer, blogger, all
Argentines
over the
know how to
world.
make fire.
Look at that incredible fire. This was teamwork, huh?
You know, that's
I
the
gathered
biggest
little
beef
pieces of
exporting country
firewood.
in the
Good
world.
team.
They
I
know
confirm.
a lot about
I
cooking
confirm.
beef.
Great
The
team,
smell
right?
of
Look at those little
cooking
logs.
flesh is
They're
in the air all the
beautiful,
time.
perfectly
Asado.
cut. I put them together.
Barbecue is asado.
This is what they gave us to put on the grill.
Asado, outside barbecue
The meat,
grill.
2 blood sausages that I love, and 2 little sausages. We bought bread
That's
to
called
make
morsi.
quarry panes
No, that's
too.
not morsi. That's more
Our
Della.
star grill.
More Della.
This is a joint effort too, huh?
They eat everything.
Look at these
they eat
coals.
the innards. They eat the intestines.
Spectacular,
and all these little
incredible.
organs in
There they are,
That's
huh?
the
How
asado
is
to
it?
them. Instead
They're getting
of eating
hotter.
like a steak,
We just put the meat on.
they put all
We
the
sprinkle
strange
salt on the
fatty
meat before
meats
putting
and
it on.
organs and
That's our
intestines on
secret.
there and
Oh,
Marty,
fill them with
tell
blood
us
and
how the
call it
barbecue is
morcilla.
coming.
When they fill the intestine
Oh,
parts
I
with
think this is the
blood.
first time I've made it,
And then you
but
eat
I think
blood
it's ready.
sausage.
I think everything is ready. Look, let me show you.
That's
This
a
is
sausage.
spectacular, people. Look at the doneness
I
of
got
this
a
meat.
steak. That makes I can taste that. That makes me.
And here we have, well, this is just the starter, the sausages to make quarry panes, the first meat, because we left the other ones there so they don't get cold on the grill, the
Let me
spectacular,
go forward
incredible
and
and unique
see
lettuce,
what they can
tomato
say.
and onion salad, well, a glass of wine.
So anyway, that's the Eden Hotel on the Falda. What I'm telling you is, when Hitler was after World War II, he didn't die. I think a lot of people know that by now. He went to Argentina and he stayed at this hotel. He went further south and stayed in Bariloche, which is where most people say he was. And there's pictures of him in Bariloche. But I know when he first got to Argentina, he came on a submarine. He got plastic surgery. And when he got off the submarine in La Plata, Argentina, his face was wrapped up because he had plastic surgery. And it's also the way he hid his identity, because he was one of the people on that submarine that were always wrapped up, their faces, and they didn't know who they were. Captain of the sub and everybody. It was a secret. I think the word got out. They probably knew they were shipping Hitler out. Nobody said anything. He arrived in Argentina and he went to Córdoba and he went to this town, La Falda. And he stayed at this little garden campy area with Ava. And at that time that the Eichhorn, they pronounce it Eichhorn, man owned it. And then in 80, that was in like 47, probably 48. So 40 years later, in 85. I'm down there with the grandchildren going, hey, my dad used to own that hotel. Really? Oh, yeah. Hitler stayed here and he's friends with my dad, my granddad. Oh, really? Yeah. So that was a good, that's the show, guys. Talk a little bit about the most important alien abductions in South America that are the old classic, old school good ones. You got the Chilean with the time travel. There's another one, didn't I show you, where the Friendship Island, did we get to that video? I don't think we showed it. Here it is.
The most comprehensive investigation regarding the Friendship Island case at the time was conducted by Spanish ufologist Joseph Gallardo. He discovered a witness that would prove to be an invaluable asset in the story, Ernesto de la Fuente, the only person who is known for certain to have visited the island. Ernesto was in fact one of the first TV hosts in the early days of locally produced Chilean television
He's a TV
shows.
host guy.
He later became one of the first and most respected documentary producers. However,
that's
in
a
the
pretty
early
good
80s,
career to have if
old
you're gonna
and
be an
sickly Ernesto
experiencer.
became somewhat of a hermit when he decided to retire.
Because then you can become a hermit.
Chiloé.
And move to
There he
the
became an
little
avid
island
amateur
where all the
radio
the
operator,
blonde-haired
and
aliens
it wasn't long before he was contacted by the Friendship Island community. Later, he started running errands for them in Chiloé's towns and ports. After 1.5 years, he eventually discovered he had cancer, and that was when he visited the island. He would later state, "I was in shock to find out that these friends I had spoken with for so long were actually aliens." His words, not ours. While Ernesto Point told him he felt like he hit the jackpot because, quote, a congregation of strange priests had hired him. Later Ernesto
Jesuit
started
priests.
interrogating
Usually
the
when you see
workers that were
priests out
being
there, it's
transported
they're
to and
Jesuit.
from the island in the Middleast II. They told him that this congregation had bought an island in the south of Chile and were settling down there. The congregation called themselves Friendship. This is when Ernesto started his communications with the islanders and started running errands for them. His main job was to gather and host people that were traveling to the island, and then deliver them to the Middleast II yacht. That's when he met these mysterious priests face to face for the first time. He would later state that they possessed a very special aura that transmitted peace and calm to everyone in their presence, and to be perceived as kind and wise. When Ernesto asked them about their wisdom, they told him, quote, "We are not wise, we just receive knowledge from our Lord's angels." It was during this time that Ernesto discovered he had terminal lung cancer. When he told Friendship about this,
So
they
they're like
told him they
special
would heal
angel
him.
beings that
That's when instead
communicate
of
with
bringing
the Lord
people
and do
over
the
to
will
the
of God.
Middleast II yacht, it was time for him
What they say.
to embark. He says they traveled among the intricate archipelago for hours, going around and between islands he had never seen before. Until night came, and he fell asleep. The next day they were still navigating. Finally, by around 4 p.m., they docked on the island. They took him into a small and modest building. Its interior was decorated in the style of the time, and it was quite fancy. He then entered a room that contained an elevator. Ernesto thought it was strange, since the building had no second floor. He entered and the elevator started going down.
He went
down
into
and
an
down.
elevator and the building had
This
no
left
second
him in
floor.
shock, because he never imagined such a facility being in a place like this. When the doors opened, he found himself in a huge and beautiful underground space, with a mild and constant temperature, pure and clean air, warm lights and all sorts of accommodations. There lived
So
a
it's all
plethora
hidden
of people,
underground. You
women,
never
men, children and even some elderly folks. Ernesto recognized many of them as the exact same people whom he had picked up, hosted and delivered to the Middleast II in port. There were computer stations everywhere, way too advanced for the time, in which you
Can
could
you imagine?
access
So
touch
these people
screens
go
and
up on the
request
surface of
information
Earth just
regarding
to
the
live in that
facility,
town and do
such as
earthly
locations,
human stuff.
what was for dinner and whatnot.
But they really live advanced.
This may
down
not
there.
seem impressive today, but remember this was the 80s. The facility's population consisted of the so-called mysterious priests, no more than 14, and over 60 more regular people. Ernesto de la Fuente said in an
A few
interview that
priests
when he
and
asked the
60
priests who they were and where they came from, their answer was, quote, "We are the servants of the Lord." Shortly after, he was taken to what looked like a top-of-the-line medical clinic. When
Good
attempting
ones that
to
didn't
explain
fall.
what was done to him there, Ernesto said, quote, "It's hard for me to find the words. I know I was intervened in some manner, but I was never cut open. I stayed for 4 or 5
Where would
days
they
in an
fit in a
elegant and
religious
intricate
story?
medical bed of some
Let me stop that for a second. Where would these be? You hear about, let's talk about like in religion and angels, you have archons and what is it, 72 archons major. And you go through the other cards of the tarot and the 72. And then you have other religions that believe in fallen angels. And then there's the jinn and there's grays and then suddenly you have these heavenly blonde beings that are always glowing with light that heal people and they don't cuss. And where do they fit in the geometry of most major religions? What are they? Are they just good angels? Or are they beings? They say they do the will of God, and they're the, what did they say? They're the messengers of the messengers of God. But I guess they're high angels. But like, where's like Michael? Isn't Michael one of the archangel? But some of this stuff we have to know that it can't be exactly right if there's so many different religions. But here are these beings. Are these the beings that are watching the whole world? Then what are they doing? Are they controlling anything, or do they take off and go visit faraway countries, or do they just sit on this little island in Chile as alien beings and everybody knows about them? And there they go.
sort with many devices that came online from time to time, and when I was finally let out, I was healed. During the whole process, I never experienced even a slight amount of pain or fear.
Grinding, and then when he got up,
He then stayed for 2 more days in which he was cared for diligently.
he was healed.
When he left the island, he immediately traveled to the capital Santiago to get examined by medics.
This is the story
They
that
found he
Jorge
wasn't
George
sick
told me
anymore.
in Bella Vista about this man that was abducted.
This
by
zone of
the
southern
Zetetic.
Chile has a rich mythological tradition,
It was the
and there have been
Friendship
sightings of
Island.
strange things. Phenomenon that current fishermen report is different names throughout the ages. There are historical reports of fishermen encountering strange boats with
Maybe
very
they'll
tall
mate
and
with some of
blonde
those
people in
to
them.
have offspring. But it
By
doesn't look
connecting
like
the
these,
information provided by witnesses, local
these
urban
angels,
legends,
I guess
many
we'll call them,
ufologists,
beings,
investigators, and
they're
even the
not
military
interested in
have attempted to
breeding
finally
with
find
humans or
Friendship
making a
Island.
hybrid.
However, it has
But
never been
for some
found.
reason, you get the vibe
That concludes.
they're there and they have human interaction, but they're not here to mate with you. You're not going to see it, one of the females naked. Darn it. Aren't they gorgeous? But so I wanted to show you that. So now we've covered it. We've covered the Friendship Island, the man Valdez in Chile that lost time in 15 minutes. He had a beard and looks like he went through 5 years. He aged a little bit. And then you have the Brazilian story of the man, Vila. What's his last name? Vila Boas. Antonio Vilas Boas. He's the one that was taken on a ship by 4 aliens with the deep sea diving suits on, the blondes with blue eyes, and they came in, took their suits off, and one was a naked blonde woman who laid with him on a bed. He said she had bright red pubic hair, bright red armpit hair. Her eyes were big, blue, slanty, anime like eyes, and she had blonde hair, really, really blonde hair, all the way coming out of her head, and there were no black roots, and just this platinum blonde hair, and very sharp chin and pointed nose. And he said she was the most beautiful female he was ever attracted to. And wham, bam, thank you. And then she pointed to her belly, and she pointed to him, and then she put her hand up to the sky, like, I'm going to have your child and take him to my other planet and raise him, and you'll never know. Maybe you'll see him again, or maybe I'll come back. So those are the stories I wanted to cover tonight, plus a little bit of my story when I was abducted. I went on a ride with some Greys when I was 6 years old. They came to my window, and I told them telepathically, there were 5 outside my window, come with us. And I said, not without my mom. They went and woke up my mom, I saw her in the yard going like this, I'll be back 1 minute. And she left. She had a robe on. It was blowing in the wind. And she went in, flew off, the bright colors underneath the craft, and then it takes off. And I waited. And then they came back, and then she was walking across the yard. She came in and got me. And I went out, and there were 2 craft, and then one took off. And I got in the other one, and she didn't go with me. And I flew off over the Gulf, and we lived near the Gulf, and we had boats on the Gulf. So at 6.5, almost 7, I knew where the Gulf of Mexico was, and we took our boats there. So I knew we flew out over the Gulf, and then we hit a big landmass. It must have been South America. I think they showed me some shiny city in the jungle or somewhere hidden, like a Hollow Earth thing, maybe. Or maybe we went as far as Antarctica. I don't know. We flew really fast. I've flown a lot on business. I've probably got about 5 million miles since 1991 flying in business. And I would guess we were at about 70, 80,000 feet going over 2,000 miles an hour. And you go to different places, but you don't feel it. The whole time in the beginning when I started having flashback memories of that, I didn't remember for 48 years, just in 2018. I thought I was looking at screens and we were still parked in the yard and the door was open and my mother was standing by the ramp. But I remember sitting in the chair with my hands on the panel and the symbols for how to fly it. And the alien on my right was pointing to the generator that was expanding, like showing that spooling up with the field. And then the walls of the craft went invisible and it took off. And you can just look right through the walls of the craft, like you just see where you're going. But there's no inertia. Like when it takes off, you don't have to hold on to anything. There's absolutely no. You just feel like you're sitting there, and you open the door and you're someplace else. But I didn't remember that for a long time, and I've had regression therapy, and I told my mother about it, and she remembers it. I think we forgot because she didn't allow us to talk about it. But I would have remembered that. I think I just closed it off and it disappeared in my memory. So remember that you can have wild memories come out of you, like if you don't think you were ever boost if you don't think you were ever essayed or abducted or took a ride with some aliens, you can just have these memories. They come as flashbacks, and all of a sudden you go, "Oh my God!" And you'll remember stuff. And I think people have problems with that because sometimes it's bad things. But I did that. I remember I was just an adult, like most people, when I saw shows about aliens and wondered if they were real and what it would be like. And so glad that never happened to me and all that talk. And then suddenly having flashbacks and remembering things. It's kind of a weird life now. But part of the reason why I started this channel, I've got so many stories to share. And so that's it for tonight, folks. I will see you tomorrow. Subject will be upcoming when you see the premiere announcement on your algorithm. I put them out ahead of time. All right? Let's have a prayer. Heavenly Father, please bless those that are here who saw us to the end and talked about the topics of the different beings of the kingdom that are out here. And please bless them, bless us, trying to learn and being righteous, wholesome, good people for thy kingdom. When we die, we want to go straight up to thee, not around with the other beings. And this we pray. Amen. All right. I'll see you over and out.